Cassandra Newby-Alexander, and I am the program director for this conference series, 1619, The Making of America. Thank you all for coming. This exciting panel is entitled The Diaspora of Dance. I hope you enjoy it. I welcome each and every one of you, and part of this presentation has come out of a partnership, a new partnership that we have with the Virginia Arts Festival. And Robert Cross, if you could stand for us. He is the director of the Virginia Arts Festival, and he is here to participate along with the rest of you in this panel. Now I would like to hand it over to the panel moderator, who graciously stepped in for us and agreed to moderate this exciting panel. And her name is Tarin Hampton, Dr. Tarin Hampton. She's an associate professor of health, physical education, and exercise science here at Norfolk State University. Dr. Hampton.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sure you've been enjoying the wonderful talks that we've been having here today. It's truly been a positive experience for me. I am very honored, humbled and honored to be able to moderate this session with such wonderful women of dance who are, you will see, they're just awesome. They have a story to tell, and they tell it with passion. Our first guest is none other than the wonderful Mama Kariamu Welsh. Kariamu is a choreographer in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She received her Doctor of Arts from New York University and her MA-H from the State University of New York at Buffalo. Widely published in both scholarly journals and book-length studies, she is a scholar of cultural studies, including performance and culture within Africa and the African diaspora. She is the author of Zimbabwe Dance, Rhythmic Forces, Ancestral Voices, and Aesthetic Analysis. She is the editor of the African Aesthetic, Keeper of Traditions, and African Dance, an Artistic, Historical, and Philosophical Inquiry, African World Press. She co-edited African Culture, Rhythms of Unity. Dr. Welch is the artistic director of Kariamu Company, Traditions. Kariamu is the recipient of numerous fellowships, grants, and awards, including a National Endowment for the Arts in Choreography Fellowship, the Creative Public Service Award of New York, a 1997 Pew Fellowship, a 1997 Simon Guggenheim Fellowship, a 1998 Pennsylvania Council of the Arts grant, a senior Fulbright Scholar awardee, and she is currently on the Fulbright Specialist roster. She is the founder, artistic director of the National Dance Company of Zimbabwe in Southern Africa. Most recently, she, along with her collaborators, Nye Freylon and Maya Freylon Asante, received the NPN, the NEFA, and the NEA grants for the Clothesline Muse. It premiered in March of 2014 and will still be touring Southeastern in the winter of spring 2015. Kariamu is the creator of the Mfundele technique, a contemporary African dance technique that has been in existence over 40 years and is taught in Africa and the diaspora. I humbly present our elder, Dr. Kariamu Welsh. Please welcome.
Thank you, Ashe, Asheo. I want to first begin because I have such distinguished colleagues with me on the panel. I want to first thank Cassandra for this incredible vision and idea of a conference that deals with the making of America 1619 as seen through the prism of African Americans and Africans. I also want to say, as the beginning panelist, that I'm very honored to be on the panel with my colleague, Gwendola Mills, who also is my dance daughter. I taught her many moons ago, and she, of course, was a professor here at Norfolk State and is now a professor at Morgan State University. And then, of course, Virginia Johnson, who, as now the artistic director of the Dance Theater of Harlem, I saw her many moons ago dancing many roles, but in particular the role of Giselle. And Dr. Mills is going to talk about transmutation and synthesis. And Virginia, in the role of Giselle, definitely represented transmutation and synthesis as Arthur Mitchell set that piece in New Orleans and changed the context of the piece and made it more relative to people of color. So I'm very honored to be on the panel with them, and I'm also honored to see a few of my dear friends here as well. And I want to take this opportunity to begin the way I would begin a presentation, and with your permission, I would like to do a libation and call upon some of the people that have made it possible for the three of us to be here, but who have now left this world. So with your permission, I'm going to do a libation. So we call upon our ancestors far and near, father of our fathers, mothers of our mothers, to render mercy, to bear witness to the victory and the liberation of our people. We call upon our children and their children to witness what we have done, to see who we are and where we've been, to learn truth from us and strength from us, and to be not afraid as we were not afraid. I call upon Pearl Primus. Ashe.
Catherine Dunham.
Ashe. Pearl Reynolds.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Craig Spider-Moore.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Ashe. Ashe. Alvin Ailey.
Ashe.
All right, so that just gives you some of the shoulders that we stand on in order for us to be here where we are. Thank you. All right then, so, no, I'm fine, thank you. So again, it's kind of fitting that I start out because I'm actually dealing with dance in the early 17th century. And I'm dealing with three kinds of dance, most of them that probably many of you have never heard of. They are field hollers, the Pinkster festivals, and the ring shout. So they all represent how dance has informed American culture. And of course, this was at a time period where there were no recordings. The writings were done, the little bit of writing that was done by plantation owners, so they were very pejorative in terms of their descriptions. Nevertheless, they were useful in letting us know that the enslaved African carried on dance traditions in the New World that they were able to glean from the Old World. So African American dance began on the ships that crossed the Atlantic and brought enslaved Africans from many different ethnic groups. This early intercultural activity, albeit forced, provided a vehicle for the expression of a new ethnic group, the African American. It was what the scholar Katrina Hazard-Donald calls dancing to the lash. Enslaved Africans were forced to dance on the deck of the ship as they were being brought over during the Middle Passage in order to keep them healthy and viable for sale. Therefore, the first mingling of these different groups was on the slave ships that crossed the Middle Passage. The enslaved African was able to sing his sacred song and dance her sacred dance in this strange and hostile land. Faith in God and their proclivity for music and dance helped to ease the enslavement experience. On Sunday, once they were on plantations, a day when the enslaved African was generally given some respite, they took the time to tend to family matters, attend worship, and enjoy some kind of release, and that was generally in the form of music and dance. These activities were often done in sync with the physical release occurring in church or their sacred place, as they had no, at that time, official churches. And family matters were peppered with song and dance, so they made the most of the little time that they had on Sundays. The dancing grounds are all over the South, and as far north as New York and Philadelphia. Many of you may know the Congo Square or have heard of Congo Square in New Orleans. It's long been noted as a sacred place, gathering place for free and enslaved Africans in New Orleans. But did you know that in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, there is also a Congo Square? Unfortunately, it has been built over. There's now, for those of you who know Philadelphia, is now where Rittenhouse Square is, which is a park and high-rise buildings for upper middle class and wealthy Philadelphians, but underneath that is the sacred Congo Square, where enslaved Africans and freed Africans used to come and dance and perform their music. So that's something else that for you students, we need to discover where those Congo Squares are around the country and retrieve them. The dancing ground goes back to Africa, where villages would carve out a space in the center to perform their ceremonies and rituals that always included dance. In this essay, I discussed the field hollers, also known as sorrow songs, Pinkster celebrations, and the ring shout as Africanisms that survived in America and took on new meanings and context accordingly. We had a speaker before this session that spoke about hip-hop and gangster rap. Well, hip-hop and the whole notion of rap, and rap in its purest form, not only does it go back to Africa, but the field hollers that I'm going to talk about now were the ability to put into sounds and words without instrumental music the feelings of the people. So the enslaved Africans were able to, while they were working in the fields, they were able to compose these songs and sing them, and it helped to carry them through this very arduous work. All right, so it had pretty much the same function as what we call our early rap music. To relieve their pain, tedium, and to connect with a spiritual source, the enslaved Africans would collectively begin to sing. These songs were called hollers because they were not words and appeared to be outside, to an outside ear, that they were just hollering. So that actually field hollers was a term given to them by a plantation owner. Accompanying the field hollers would be movement of a subtle source that would embody spirit and soul in such a way the day passed quicker and they would be closer to some kind of sustenance and rest. You can imagine that these enslaved Africans were working from sunup to sundown with very little rest. And so it took the field hollers and the swaying of the movements to sustain them to go through a whole day. Sometimes these enslaved Africans would be pregnant women. Sometimes they would be older women. Sometimes they would actually be children. And so this was very difficult for them. Calling on God in a seemingly unintelligible language, protect the enslaved Africans from punishment, since the codes embedded in the hollers were known to them and them alone, and they could not be accused of insurrection or mutiny. The songs were indeed a balm to the souls of the enslaved Africans, and their plaintive cries spoke eloquently of their pain and suffering. The field house are distinguished from the collective work song in that the work songs were, the field house, began solo. One person would initiate the song, and then the rest of the field workers would come in and then pass it along to one another. Though commonly associated with cotton cultivation, the field holla was also sung by levee workers, mule skinners, and field hands in rice and sugar plantation. As described by Frederick Law Olmsted in 1853, it was a long, loud, musical shout, rising and falling and breaking into falsetto, a description that would have fitted examples recorded a century later. Most hollers are wordless, but there are some exceptions. And of course, this is improvisation at its finest. These are not recorded, they're not written down, so this will be improvised. It'll be improvised each time they would go out. But of course, they began to have a collective energy and a collective ethos, so that a certain sound was associated with the field hollers. Later on, field hollers were actually discovered in prison camps in the South, where conditions were not so different from the plantations of a century ago. And I'm not going to, I have many examples, and I think that Cassandra may be making these available to you if you want to read some of the references. But I think that it's notable that the field hollers are the very first cultural expressions of the enslaved Africans in America, and they should be duly noted as such. The field hollers were some of the musical and dance expressions that came out of the enslavement period. These guttural and urgent sounds told the story of suffering. At the time, they were in and of themselves great vehicles of relief and solidarity. And this is very important. So this is also a means of social activity and solidarity in their oppression. They provided the workers with a resource that could energize them and help to restore their strength so they could continue for several more hours. And now I want to talk about the Pinkster celebrations, which actually took place in the North. They were in Ohio, they were in New York, and some parts of Pennsylvania. They were festive occasions, and again, we normally think of the North as not having slavery, but that's not true. And there were enslaved Africans in the North. These were festive occasions that centered around a week of frivolity, foodstuffs, and play. Central to these activities was dance, an annual festival beginning on Pentecost. And this actually, Whitsuntide in the Anglican calendar, celebrated in Albany, New York, first by the Dutch and then by their slaves. So this was actually a festival that was brought up by the Dutch, and then the enslaved Africans accommodated or appropriated is the word, this festival, and it became very much theirs. Pinkster, by 1800, had become a central feature of African American social life in the Hudson Valley. There's actually a written account that Sojourner Truth, as we all know who Sojourner Truth is, and other young black women were active participants reveling through the much anticipated Pinkster holiday. And it is written that the holiday meant so much to Sojourner Truth that one year she resolved to go, even if it meant returning to her former master, an abusive man who had sold her 5-year-old son illegally and from whom she had fled. So I mean, that's saying a lot about her desire to go and have this sort of physical and social and and an emotional interaction. As a Pinkster reveler, sojourner engaged in European folk dancing, as well as rhythmic, double shuffle, heel and toe breakdown, the jug, and what one writer is calling the sexually provocative toto, or toto dance. Now what's interesting about this for you historians, is that when colonialists, plantation owners, missionaries, and sometimes governors write about when they see black people dancing in those times, because they didn't understand the dance, they would often characterize it as lewd, lascivious, overly sexual. So we have to take those comments with a grain of salt, because again, they were going from a very puritanical stance, and we have to question whether that was really true. One eyewitness actually described the toto as the most indecent dance that could well be imagined. And part of it is that they were probably using their pelvis, and the pelvis obviously is part of the body, but in, again, puritanical stance, and also in terms of the common ideology, the head is separated from the body, and so that you don't move the body. That would be sinful. And of course, at these festivals, people did drink, and of course, the dancing then became more intense and loose. But again, I think the characterization of the dances fall short, other than several descriptions of it being lewd and lascivious. So that, again, words like barbarism, a horrid manner, that the women were described as harlots, and that the music was indeed savage. And what happened was that, again, the rhythm of the drum, the intensity of the fiddles, and all of that gave a very, very festive, intense atmosphere for one which the Dutch were not used to, and it frightened them. The beautiful thing that I found in this research is that the toto dance is actually a dance that goes back to Guinea in West Africa, and it was obviously something that the Africans were able to retain and carry with them. So characterizations like the one above were common from onlookers and pious observers who mistook and misunderstood the revelers' relationship with the body and their attitudes about sexuality. The African sensibility culturally has in general been resistant to the puritanical stance of the early Americans who considered the body as a place of evil. And now, I'm looking at this, the field hollers, the Pinkster festivals, and the Ming Shout through the lens of not a historian, but through the lens of dance studies. And so I'm very interested in how movement was perceived in the 17th century. So again, for the sake of time, I'm going to move through some of this. The Pinkster Festival is no longer celebrated, and it, even though it was celebrated in many places in the North at the time, eventually it was actually outlawed, as were so many of the things that Africans did in America during that time period, because they was afraid that it would incite trouble, it would incite unrest, and they would not be able to control the natives. So it's very interesting. I also think it's interesting that there was this notion of a king that came with the Pinkster Festival, and this king was a black man. And during the festival, which took place for a week, he, in a sense, was empowered to be able to do pretty much what he wanted to do, including tell white people what to do. And that's kind of a remarkable kind of thing, given the time period. But it only lasted for a week, and then it was over, so, but he was king for a week. So several scholars, notably H.A. Williams-Meyer and Eileen Southern, have identified African cultural survivals that surfaced during Pinkster, and among them were drumming ecstatic dancing, and a ritual use of space that was specifically associated with Guinea or Africa. And so now I'm going to talk about the ring shout. And the ring shout is something that was done in the churches off the coast of, in South Carolina and Georgia. But they were done in the islands, actually, off of South Carolina and Georgia, called the Sea Islands. And that culture is, you know, there's still some semblance of it today. The ring shout was an early Negro holy dance in which the circling about in a circle is the prime essential. From early reports, we have learned that the participants stood in a ring and began to walk around it in a shuffle, with the people keeping in contact with or close proximity to the floor. This close proximity to the floor was symbolic of the early African Americans' relationship to the earth. This belief and relationship were Africanist residuals that held the earth as sacred because that was where the food came from and where the ancestors resided. These movements were accompanied with spirituals and hand and knee clapping. Harold Corlander has defined the ring shout as an example of African survivals. The earliest that we have on record in terms of recording it in written documents is 1845, but the practice clearly antedates that record. Again, we have, unfortunately, some pejorative descriptions of the ring shout, but I just want to show you what the ring shout did. Some of you, depending on the kind of church or that you attend, you may not see this exactly, but you all know what shouting is, or most of you know what shouting is. That's a very important part of spiritual expression in many African American churches, and now, of course, in also other evangelical white churches as well. But the ring shout, the early ring shout, was done counterclockwise, and it was done to hand clapping rhythm, and then work itself up into a frenzy, I should say, until people were able to transcend. They were able to transcend, which is, of course, the meaning of shouting, to meet their Lord, to commune with their God, and then they would come down. So let me just show you the basic movement. So it's counterclockwise, all right, and it would be. Until they achieved their mission, which was to commune with God, to reach God. And so you can see how intense and beautiful and powerful this was, and how it embodied the praiser, the worshiper, and how, again, it made them forget their troubles, their daily troubles. So the ring shout is very important, and some of you in contemporary churches we have a little more vigorous versions of the shout, but this is the origins. Okay, thank you.
Let's give her another round of applause. This is our elder. Come on.
Yes, I'm finished, but I just want to say again that I want to stress to all of you, young and older, that it is so important, and I thank again Cassandra for this conference, but it's so important that you know not only where you come from, but the origins of some of these things, because they're not available to you through YouTube or through television, but they're there, and you must read about them, and you must, as you go forward instead of reinventing the wheel, extend that knowledge. So thank you again. Ashe.
Our next guest is Mrs. Vivian Johnson. She is the founding member and former principal dancer of the Dance Theater of Harlem, or DTH, as many know the company by, where she is now the artistic director. Born in Washington, D.C., Ms. Johnson graduated from the Academy of the Washington School of Ballet and briefly attended the School of the Arts at New York University as a university scholar before joining DTH in 1969. During her 28 years with the company, she performed most of the repertoire, with principal roles in Concerto Barocco, Allegro Brillante, Egon, A Streetcar Named Desire, Fall River, Legend, Swan Lake, Giselle, Voluntaries, among many others, several of which were recorded for broadcast on PBS, network television, and cable. Her choreographic credits include the television film Ancient Voices of Children, and works with Goucher College, Dancers Responding to AIDS, the second annual Harlem Festival of the Arts, Thelma Hill Performing Arts Center, and Marymount Manhattan College, where she was an adjunct professor. While still performing, her interest in journalism led her to the Fordham University. After retiring from performing, she founded The Point magazine and was editor-in-chief from 2000 to 2009. Her honors include a Young Achiever Award from the National Council of Women, Outstanding Young Woman of America, and the Dance Magazine Award, a Pen and Brush Achievement Award, the Washington Performing Arts Society 2008-2009, Pola Norinska Lifetime Achievement Award, the 2009 Martha Hill Fund Career Award, and an honorary doctorate from Cornish College of the Arts. Her commitment to community service is maintained through volunteer assignments with New York Cares. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Virginia Johnson.
Thank you, Tarin. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Cassandra, for the opportunity to be here and to share the stage with such an illustrious panel. It is really an honor, and I'm in particular interested in this topic, this 1619, this idea of examining our history and bringing it forward, making it live in so many different ways. I'm going to talk today, my topic is 45 years of the Dance Theater of Harlem. The company is 45 years old. It was 45 years old on February 11th of this year. The subtitle is A Repertoire That Speaks American. Dr. Bowser gave us an amazing talk earlier today, and he talked about the destructive tool that gangster rap is. Dance Theater of Harlem was imagined by Arthur Mitchell when he founded it as a tool of empowerment. You may know that Arthur Mitchell was the first African-American dancer who was a principal, to become a principal with an American ballet company. Because there was that whole idea that blacks can't do ballet, that it's not part of our culture. So Arthur Mitchell, in his own self, created a surprise for the world. He said, oh yes, I can. Yes, it is very possible, given access and opportunity, to create a future that you don't expect. Arthur Mitchell had a very successful career. He was being asked by the US government to go to Brazil to start a ballet company, to build better relations with South America. When he was on his way to the airport, when he heard about the assassination of Dr. King. And Dr. King had been a big influence on Arthur Mitchell, You know, all of us back in the 1960s were watching what was happening in the world and trying to figure out how we were going to make a difference, how we were going to change a situation that was so impossible. And Arthur Mitchell was inspired by the way that Dr. King used his talent, used his intellect, used a force that was not expected to make a big difference in the world. So when he heard about the assassination of Dr. King, he said, what can I do? How can I make a difference? I'm a ballet dancer, what can I do? Well, he had the idea of creating a school in Harlem. It wasn't called Dance Theater of Harlem at that point, but he wanted to build a school in Harlem because he thought that the way to make a difference in the lives of these young people in the neighborhood where he grew up, these young people who had been written off by society, who didn't have a bright future, who were not getting the kind of education that would give them a future, who were not given the kind of self-esteem that would give them a future, was to train them in a classical art form. Because when you address a classical art form, you address something that is very large and established, that is codified, that has standards, that require you to understand your relationship to something that's bigger and outside of you. There are so many aspects of the idea of studying an art form that was not inherently part of your experience as a tool, because he knew that he could give these young people a better future if he could let them step outside of the world that they were living in, that was tremendously negative and tremendously destructive, and give them within themselves the opportunity to do something different. He wasn't looking to make ballet dancers at all. He was looking to make a new future. Doctors, lawyers, young people who had a chance to go out and get a job and step out of the cycle of despair that was part of the time. So he, and how many people know Arthur Mitchell, have heard of him? How many people have experienced Arthur Mitchell? A few. A few know that this is one very dynamic, driven, maniacal human being. And when Arthur Mitchell set out to do something, Arthur Mitchell was going to make it happen. And he was the person who was able to create this idea, this future, where this 400 young people became part of Dance Theater of Harlem School right from the beginning. In the middle of that period, almost a year into the time that he started the school, he realized that these young people needed to have a chance. They needed to see where they could go with this. They needed to see other people like themselves doing this art form that he kept telling them they weren't doing right. It takes a good long time to become a classical dancer. He needed to provide them with the encouragement to stick through the process by seeing the beauty of us doing ballet. And so he created the Dance Theater of Harlem Company. This is where my story intersects, because I'm actually a founding member of the company. I came to New York in 1968 to become a scholar at New York University and found out that Arthur Mitchell was starting a ballet company. So I was part of that first group of dancers who was with Arthur Mitchell trying to change people's minds. We were trying to change people's minds not just about ballet, but change people's minds about what they could expect from us as people. So our first years with Dance Theater of Harlem, as we were talking about this repertoire that speaks American, was about telling people what this art form was and telling people what it could be. In our first years, because we were a young company and we didn't have a lot of money, all the choreography was by Arthur Mitchell. He was a good choreographer. He created very dynamic works in which he took this group of very young dancers who had all been told, you can't do it, and infused in us the belief in ourselves that we could. So he created wonderful works for us, such as Rhythmatron, Holberg Suite, Fête Noire. These were works where we learned how to be a company, he learned how to be a choreographer, and we showed people what was possible. George Balanchine, who was one of the great choreographers of the 20th century, was our mentor. He was the founder of the New York City Ballet, where Arthur Mitchell had his career. And so George Balanchine said, look, I'm going to give you my best works so that your young dancers can really understand what neoclassical dance is. And so we were very fortunate to be able to dance Agon, the role that was a ballet that was created for Arthur Mitchell, which broke all kinds of barriers in terms of what ballet should look like. We learned Agon, we learned Concerto Barocco, we learned the Four Temperaments. These are seminal works of George Balanchine's repertoire. He gave them to us because he believed in what Arthur Mitchell was doing, and he knew that by giving us his best works, we would become the best dancers. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. George Balanchine was a Russian choreographer. He was part of the great Diaghilev tradition that started in the 1920s, and he was brought to America by Lincoln Kirsten to create a new American ballet company. Before he came to America, George Balanchine said, yes, I'm going to come to America and I'm going to make a great company, and it's going to have 6 Negro ballerinas and 6 white ballerinas. This is the idea that Balanchine had about the power of America, that we were a country that was made up of many different cultures. And he saw America as a combination of cultures, not a European offshoot, but a fusion of the cultures that lived here. Well, we all know that such a thing was not possible, to have a mixed-race company back in the 1940s, 1950s. But that was the idea that George Balanchine had in the back of his head. And that's the idea when Arthur Mitchell came to him and said, you know, I've got to start this company. And he said, go, you've got my blessing, I'm with you, here, have my ballets. Because he could see that ballet itself, the art form, needed an infusion of new life. And that's what Dance Theater of Harlem was about. So we had works by Arthur Mitchell, we had works by George Balanchine. We had very severely classical works, and I do use that word intentionally. We danced Paquita, which is a ballet that was created in the 1890s. That was a Spanish ballet created by Russian people, full of all kinds of caricatures of what they thought Spanish people were. It's really a very beautiful ballet. It's a very delightful thing to dance. It is beautiful because it's classical ballet. It uses the strictures, the structure, the rules, the vocabulary of classical ballet in a very particular way. And so we did, for a period of time, we did many of those classical works because there are still, to this day, but especially back then, people who thought, well, you're good at doing this. You're really good at that, but can you pull up and be still? Can you have that classical demeanor? So Arthur Mitchell had to show them that we could have that classical demeanor, that it's like acting. You put on a role, you learn the rules, and you perform to the rules. That is what Dance Theater of Harlem has been about from the beginning. You know, we are an outgrowth of the civil rights movement. Back in 1969 when we were founded, and throughout the 70s, we toured across the country. People came to see Dance Theater of Harlem because they thought they were going to see the Harlem Globetrotters. They couldn't imagine that they were going to see a ballet company. And you know, there were white people who said that you can't do ballet, and there were black people who said that you can't do ballet. But when Arthur Mitchell set out to make this a tool of empowerment, he meant to say that if you're a human being, and you have the talent, and you are given the training, the opportunity, and the access, there isn't anything that you can't do. And that's really what Dance Theater of Harlem has been about throughout its time period. We are, of course, a company that is made up of a vast range of ethnicities because we were about embracing the human spirit. We're about showing what the human spirit is capable of, the elevation, the transcendence that the human spirit is capable of. We use this art form of ballet as our means of expression, but we don't mean ballet that's enclosed in the tiny blocks that lived in 50 or 60 years in the 19th century. We're looking at ballet as a medium of expression, as a language. It has a syntax, it has a vocabulary, it has grammar. These are things that we use, but we can use all kinds of stories. We can tell all kinds of stories with this language. Throughout our time period as a company, to go back to repertoire, from the neoclassics to the classics, we had a whole period of time where we did narrative ballets. Narrative ballets such as William Loring's Billy the Kid. We did Agnes DeMille's Fall River Legend. We did Valerie Bettis' Streetcar Named Desire. These are ballets in which you are telling a story that has a beginning, middle, and end, that's very familiar to an audience, that is a very useful way to engage an audience, but they were American stories, and Dance Theater of Harlem created them and made them possible. We attracted a brand new audience to ballet through the way that we used this language through narrative stories. The thing that was so interesting about, that continues to be interesting about Dance Theater of Harlem is the way that we have always been a touring company. We have an annual season in New York, but we are about being on the road and taking this message of empowerment across the country. In 2004, it was necessary for all kinds of financial reasons to close the company in order that the organizations could survive. The organization is actually made up of our touring company, a school in which we train young people, 500 students a year in our school, and an arts education program. So we wanted to make sure that we could continue the impact of empowering young people through the art of ballet with the school and with the arts education. In 2010, I returned to the company. Arthur Mitchell invited me back, and he said to me, "Your job is to bring back the company." And so in 2012, the Dance Theater of Harlem company was reborn. And it has been a wonderful journey for me to be part of this regrowth of the company. One of the things that I've added to our repertoire is the idea of bringing African American stories forward, using this language of ballet, telling very specific stories about our history. Because I think that we all know we don't talk about our history enough. It is not known to ourselves, and it's not known to the rest of the country. And when we're talking about being Americans, we're not on the side. We're in the center of this. We need to know our story, and they need to know our story. It shouldn't be a we, they. It is us. And making our story part of everyone's history is part of what Dance Theater of Harlem is doing now. I was speaking to wonderful Dr. Shackleton today. She did a presentation, and she had one of the pictures that we use in a ballet that's on our repertoire now. The ballet is about the Great Migration, and it's a beautiful photograph. It's a powerful photograph, rather than a beautiful photograph, of a family who is on their way. They're in the midst of leaving their home and going to a new future. And written on their faces is the idea of, I don't know where I'm going, but I have got to go. I've got to do something. I've got to make something happen different. So that's what Dance Theater of Harlem is about. It is about really being an American company in the true sense of what it means to be American. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to hear you speak to us. Our third speaker today is Dr. Gwendola Mills-Parker. She was here with you. She's an associate professor of dance at Norfolk State University. Dr. Mills-Parker is a scholar of African American dance, publishing articles on African and African American aesthetics and dance, with an emphasis on the image of function of dance in literature and popular culture. Her creative works include choreography and reconstruction of African and Mfundale dance works on professional companies. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gwendola Mills-Parker.
Before she goes, I just want to add my thank yous to Cassandra Newby Alexander for including in this historic. I'm sure the record will bear it out that these past 3 years have paved the way for a lot of work. Something that hasn't really been said is that a lot of this work, the original conception, had to do with preparing educators to not revise history, but to tell the truth, to help us to understand how we got to where we are and the voice of the African person in the making of America as we look back and as we look forward. And so I definitely want to, because because dance is the stepchild or stepsister, and you know, we're always left out, but she sought us out, and so she's to be commended for that. So I will beg your pardon on the second thing. I have a cold sensitivity, and you know the ice bucket challenge? That's how I feel right now. So like, if I start shivering, I am nervous, but it's more so out of cold at this point, because it just seemed like, you know, somebody turned up the air. So, okay, we'll get it. It'll come on later. We'll catch it later, but let's get the balance on that. So, I want to, let's just how much time? Okay, I'll be quick. Dancers know how to be quick. Right? And then I just want to thank those of you in the faculty that are in the room who championed me while I was here at Norfolk State. Amaya asked me about it. She said, "You don't have any hard feelings about Norfolk State?" I said, "No, I love Norfolk State. I'm still a Spartan." But, and so I've seen so many of my students and so many of my colleagues who just embraced me so much on my return here this weekend. And so I just want to say, Brian, Asante Sana to you as well. Dance as text. The emergence of early African-American dance formations, and I think as the lecturer bailed out that it does have implications for other groups as well. Various scholars have explored, researched, analyzed, and dissected the role of dance in society. What many examinations have revealed is that from the beginning of recorded time, dance has existed in one form or another. From cave drawings of early man to Kemetic hieroglyphics, to journal drawings, and even today's iPhone and YouTube videotapes, the essential bodily act of moving to rhythm and creating rhythm, otherwise called dance or dancing, is a natural outgrowth of human beings' need to express themselves. My own work focuses on the meaning and significance of movement forms and dance. As such, like all cultural phenomena, is in itself a dynamic document, and more so, let me restate that. As such, dance, like all cultural phenomena, is in itself a dynamic document, and more so a moving narrative of human history. It is laden with tales of love, joy, pain, and sorrow. It encapsulates complex notions of gender, occupation, health, and spirituality. If learned well, it can even function as an educational medium, conveying history, roles, societal hierarchy, and even among some peoples, elevate one to notoriety. One might wonder where the king of pop himself would be without his note accentuating, high kick, leg twisting, oh! Or ghost like moonwalk. I never could moonwalk. Dance is a lived document that is translatable and translated. To this end, it seems contradictory that dance would evolve from being engaged as an integral part of society, a functional, life-sustaining activity, to superfluous, marginalized encounters. I had taken this part out, but I'm going to share this with you. I grew up in the heart of North Philadelphia during the 60s, 70s, and we had a play-song game that we would do. And I was asking some of my students last week, I said, "Do you all know the Ungawa?" They were like, "Ungawa?" I said, "You know Black Power?" Black Power. So I'm going to share it with you. But we would walk around the street. Ungawa, Ungawa. This is Black Power. White boy, destroy. I said it, I meant it. I'm here to represent it. I'm a cool, cool Negro from a cool, cool town. It takes a mighty fine white boy to knock me down. We be getting down and stuff. You don't shake my apple, and we do a little butt circle. You don't climb my tree. We do like a wave. Because I'm a North Philly Negro, don't you mess with me. Now that's the PG version. But we didn't know what we were doing. But what we did know was that it created a camaraderie, a sense of community. Here we are, youngsters, I'm talking 9, 10. We didn't know nothing about no Black Power. But we knew as we were singing that song that we belonged to something larger than ourselves. We didn't quite know what, but we knew we did. And we'd have fun all summer long. Despite increased, well, I'm going to skip that part since I only have a little bit of time. In looking towards the 400th commemoration of the United States of America, it is important for the American educational system, one which in itself is experiencing afterbirth pains of a transplanted system, to inculcate clearer understanding specifically about the making of America, and more specifically about dance, the dances of peoples that constitute the making of this great nation. While scholarly work dedicated to dance has been slow, work in the area of African and African American dance philosophy, culture, aesthetics, and history has grown immensely since the mid-1990s. Now, having the benefit of emic theoretical frameworks and distance, time, to look back on this dancing narrative, we can explore, research, analyze, and dissect Melville J. Herskovitz, what he identified as a uniquely African-American cultural character that is not only distinctly African, but also representative of what he proposed, the merging of two decidedly different cultures. However, as Lee Warren wrote in The Dances of Africa, to see an African dance is to witness his cultural past and present. For the African, the fullest expression of art is dance, emphasis mine. The premise here is that the key to understanding what are considered early formations of African American dance in the process by which vernacular dance formed in addition to the perception of those forms as having value is what Barber and Carlton Millett emphatically state in Black theater, that Black art is important, it is legitimate, and it is valid, a valid form of expression. As has been clearly articulated in Brenda Dixon Gottschalk's work and supported by earlier scholars such as Dunham, Emery, Stearns, and Welsh herself, African dance and its myriad evolving forms has provided American modern and ballet with what Ashenbrenner calls an infusion of creativity. So replete throughout the historical record, Black dance, African dance, Negro dance, whatever nomenclature you use, has been at the forefront of pushing our society forward in terms of the diversity of dance and the creativity that exists in dance. African people have been at the forefront, but have been marginalized in terms of the recognition of that. The categorization of theater, a theater genre as Black, denotes this type of theater as a distinct cultural phenomena of a particular group. As such, early formations demonstrate the indelible nature of culture to sustain itself beyond limitations of time, space, or geography, and the ingenuity of its couriers to serve as conduits in the transmission of said culture, as noted by Welsh in her article, Commonalities in African Dance. The heritage of those formations is punctuated by contemporary scholars excavating contemporary forms, revealing the aesthetic continuance of its source. All of that to say, there is an African aesthetic present in the making of America. So the framework for me, one of my favorite passages is from the drama of Nomo by Paul Carter Harrison. He wrote, "Black dance is a testament in form and substance of our people's power sensibility, Movements are not designed simply to mark time to the beat of a rhythm, but to collect those forces that inspire, concrete definition of the mode. The mode is dance. The resulting image is the culmination of the order brought to the mode, the culmination of order brought to the mode, the harmonizing of forces, so as to communicate the power idea that expresses the communal objectives of the participants. As Dr. Welsh said, the Africans danced under the lash. They could not, they came from a variety of ethnic groups. They were forced in with people that they could not verbally articulate with. But what do you do when you need to articulate something, an idea, a thought, when you need to communicate with someone? If you can't use this, what do? You move. And move they did. And it is in that process of moving with one another that the dance was transformed. And so at this point, this is a model that I developed earlier on. This concept of transmutation and synthesis is conceptualized by Larry Neal. And it is the process whereby a cultural group literally transforms the cultural aspects, diverse cultural aspects, into one and maintains their center. The concept of oral principle and oral narrative are ideations by Kariamu Welsh in the article Commonalities of African Dance. These concepts come out of the ancient of traditions, the oral tradition. And it is in that act of storytelling that the African transmits culture. Someone mentioned yesterday, they said, you know, we got stripped of our history and our culture. Well, you can't strip something you can't see. You can't strip it. It's not something you can put in your pocket. So when they took the clothes off the African, that's all they did. The system, the culture was still there. It was about to take shape using different material objects. It was about to take shape, not expressing themselves in their traditional religion, but oh, they want me to participate in this new religion. I can do that. It is similar to who I am, but I also can continue forward with what I know, and I continue to transmit that to my children and my children's children, etc. And so out of that, then, the oral principle is the creative process itself. What happens when movement begins to occur? What happened when those different Africans began to move? Did somebody say, well, I like your move, I like your move, no, I don't like that move? We don't know. But what we do know is that they came to a consensus about movement, about dance, remaining an integral and important part of their life as the ritual that Dr. Welsh talked about. Ritual provides a balancing of chaos. It brings order from chaos for us. And so they could not speak and they could not move in the ways they wanted to move, but they did move. And we know that through that movement then, they were able to transcend. I get chills just thinking about how they were able to stay shackled together, to be in the close confines that they were, but yet to be able to continue to transcend and survive. And so the outcome of that then is a new dance. They're no longer doing, quote unquote, the dances that they did. They're new dances, but they still have shape. But then there are some things that are so important that we're going to hold on to them. So this plays out with articulation and appropriation. We all know what appropriation is. I'll give you an example, Elvis, right? Everybody with me? Okay. So we know what that is, but articulation is a little bit harder to discern. We can see it, it looks familiar, but I may not necessarily be able to pinpoint any particular ethnic group that it belongs to. And that becomes the quandary, as remember Ani says, for the North American African person. Because some of it we have gotten so far away from, we cannot recognize that likeness. When we see appropriation, we know it, yes, that's African. But what about all the other stuff that we feel a sense, sometimes even a familial sense of something? Welsh calls it epic memory, that reproduction of our culture from long historical memories. So there's a sense of ownership, of familiarity there, and we might even take ownership of it, but it's a little bit harder. And so the result of this oral transmutation and synthesis that takes place through the oral principle and the oral narrative then results in a new, the articulation and appropriation, giving us a new African-American dance vocabulary. We now have new rituals, and we have new values that go along with it. So, this is another way of seeing it. So that transmutation and synthesis, articulation and appropriation played out. This is the original diagram is in using Mafundala, which I did my dissertation on, and a lot of my work is based on it. But how that transmutation and synthesis plays out is in relation to the aesthetic, our worldview, culture, and aesthetic, which all combine and emanate out into our rituals, into our movement, our music, our dress, our language, and missing from this are material manifestations, because we cannot forget those material manifestations. This just breaks it down a little bit further. I'm not going to go into it, and I can share it with you afterwards, but it just gives a little bit more detail down below in terms of the various things that would constitute those different characteristics. Articulations to see them. So if we look to the far left, by a show of hands, how many of you might think that's a traditional African dance being performed? Just by show of hands, if you think maybe that might be a traditional African dance or an African dance, or how about if I say this, an ethnic dance? A couple more hands just went up. Yeah, so basically that's what you're saying. You think it's an African dance. You may not want to call it that, but that's what it is. But not in this piece. This is a piece called the museum piece. And it's a contemporary African dance. But to look at the material manifestations, we recognize raffia as something African. When you see the dance, even the dance itself, the movements resemble it. But those of us, quote unquote, who are in dance tend to be able to discern a little bit easier what's, quote unquote, traditional African dance and what's contemporary African dance and what's neoclassical. In the middle is Dr. Welsh herself in her earlier years. That's a piece, I believe, Nubian Indamirizua. She's doing Indamirizua again. You know, she's got on, now we're coming a little bit more contemporary, right? She's got on the midriff top. So it might be like, yeah, maybe a little ethnic dance or something like that, but maybe not traditional dance. But definitely we can recognize it. And then to the far right, this is a Gaynell Sherrard, who studied with Dr. Welsh earlier on. Of course, that's Dr. Welsh right there, y'all. And, but Gaynell Sherrard is now at Virginia Commonwealth University, and this is April Berry. Is that April? Yeah. And that's April Berry right there, who also, look, yeah. Virginia's like, oh. Yeah. And then this one down here is clearly, for those of us who know, again, they have on lapas, they got on the booba tops, so we might say, oh yeah, they're doing an African, but this is all articulation. This is all articulation. There's nothing traditional, quote unquote, traditional on these images here. Appropriation. Now these might even looks a little bit more contemporary, right? So it could be confusing. But in the picture there is Dr. Ward, myself, and Dr. Welsh. We have on lapas this time. We have on lapas. Lapas are an African adornment. It's a material manifestation. So we're using it. So the key thing that distinguishes appropriation from articulation is with the appropriation, we can still see the thing and make discernible connections culturally with those things. I thought this here was, oops. Huh? Okay. Which is this. Since I'm out of time, I did want to just share one more. Do I have time to share one more? Let's see what comes up. Oh, I hope this is the one I think it is. Yes. This is campus fun. Everybody on your feet. Everybody on your feet. No, that wasn't rhetorical. Everybody on your feet. Yeah. So this is an example of hip hop would be appropriation or articulation. It would be articulation. They have transformed totally. So the music's not coming out. Clap hands. Bounce. Everybody bounce. Bounce with them, y'all. Bounce with them. Put your hands in the air. Put a little hip action in it, y'all. Everybody say yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Let us give all of our speakers another round of